friend HL, who loves writing liturgy and things like that, if they would want to share some with us. So this comes from a fellow Ilifian. So for those who have been pushed out when they should have been welcomed in, for those who were promised a safe space but were met with shame and hatred of other, come and learn the ways of life. Peace be with you. May the love of Christ surround you. For those who were willing to give up everything for their faith, but then their faith asked them to kill a piece of themselves to exist. For those who feel broken and used by those who promise love and acceptance.
Peace be with you. May the love of Christ make you whole again.
Peace be with you and to you, because Christ is for you and in you. There is a place for you at the table. Come, sit and know that you belong and that you are loved. Peace be with you, and may the love of Christ fill you. I invite you to gather together in our gathering song, Hymn of Promise, United Methodist Hymnal number 707. Inexhaustible source of love and life, be with us in our time of worship, as we seek the love it takes to walk in the ways of your Son. Help us to love our enemies and bless those who wrong us, for we cannot do so alone. Teach us the joy of treating others with all the same respect and goodness with which we hope to be treated. May our every word and deed make known that we are your beloved children and vessels of your love. Amen. Before I call forth any children, forgot one announcement. I also really appreciate your patience, as I haven't done this for a while. And I've been working as a children's and youth ministry director at First United Methodist Church, so normally in church on Sundays. I'm hiding out in Sunday school, so I'm kind of surprised I remember the order of how things go. So I'm going to pass around this clipboard. It's for a 24-hour prayer vigil that Dawn and I'm sure others have put together following the general conference this week. So if you want more details, someone else probably knows a little more than I do, but 24 hours of prayer for the United Methodist Church and all of us following general conference. And are there any children who want to come forward? I mean, you can, but... All right, so I'll call our reader forward to share our scripture with us today.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to all of our visitors and anybody who didn't really want to come. That wasn't me. I was looking forward to this. My first reading is from Psalm 37, verses 1 to 11. And it talks about wickedness and not being jealous or envious of those that are wicked, because their time's coming. Ours is too, but it won't be quite as drastic. Do not fret because of the wicked. Do not be envious of wrongdoers, for they will soon fade like grass and wither like the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good, so you will live in the land and enjoy security. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will act. He will make your vindication shine like the light, and the justice of your cause like the noonday. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret over those who prosper in their way, over those who carry out evil devices. Refrain from anger and forsake wrath. Do not fret, it leads only to evil. For the wicked shall be cut off, but those who wait for the Lord shall inherit the land. Yet a little while, and the wicked will be no more. Though you look diligently for their place, they will not be there. But the meek shall inherit the land and delight themselves in abundant prosperity. And also from Psalm 37, verses 39 and 40. The salvation of the righteous is from the Lord. He is their refuge in the time of trouble. The Lord helps them and rescues them. He rescues them from the wicked and saves them, because they take refuge in him. And my next reading is from 1 Corinthians verses 35 through 38. And this is about the resurrection of body. But someone will ask, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body do they come? Fool, what you sow does not come to life unless it dies. And as for what you sow, you do not sow the body that is to be, but a bare seed, perhaps of wheat or some other grain. But God gives it a body as he has chosen, and to each kind of seed its own body. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. Good morning again. It's truly a privilege and an honor to be here with all of you in worship today. When Dawn originally asked me to preach about a month or so ago, I hadn't really thought much about it. I kind of figured, since my birthday is on Monday, what a great opportunity this would be to come home and celebrate with all my friends and family. So after agreeing to be here this morning, I kind of started thinking a little bit more about what time of year it is and what's going on, and it dawned on me. This is the weekend of the United Methodist Church's special session of the General Conference. And for those of you who are unaware of what this means or what it is, I'll do my best to give you a quick rundown. United Methodist delegates and members from all over the world are gathered currently in St. Louis, Missouri, to discuss specific passages in the Book of Discipline concerning human sexuality. The Book of Discipline acts as the United Methodist Church's governing document. It's essentially a law book, so to speak. It determines our administration, our organizational work, and all the procedures that the United Methodist Church has to follow. And currently, the Book of Discipline states that self-avowed practicing homosexuals are not to be certified as candidates, ordained as ministers, or appointed to serve the United Methodist Church. Following passages in the Book of Discipline prevents boards, committees, and others from funding any LGBTQ+ groups. This stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and the pluses of the rest of the alphabet, even if these groups happen to share a mission that is similar to the mission of the United Methodist Church. Now, the goal of the special session of the General Conference is to hopefully remove this language and make room for a more progressive, more inclusive, and more unified church. Now, there have been dozens of plans submitted to the Committee on Reference, and this committee was responsible for reviewing all these petitions and all these plans to determine whether or not these were in harmony with the call for the General Conference. 3 of these reports that have been proposed have been considered to be harmonic with the call of the United Methodist Church, and it's these 3 that are being considered as the best options at General Conference as the United Methodist Church decides how we're going to move forward. Now, to save time and hopefully prevent some boredom, I'm not going to go into what all of these plans mean. but I will take an opportunity to point out that none of these plans offer full inclusivity for LGBTQ+ members in the United Methodist Church. I will agree, however, that the One Church plan, which is the plan that is most supported by the Council of Bishops and the Commission of Way Forward, is a step forward, but it's not enough. And if it seems as though maybe I'm taking this a little bit too personally, or if I'm a little bit too invested in it, well, I am. As according to the Book of Discipline, I'm a self-avowed practicing homosexual, and this language in the Book of Discipline and the future United Methodist Church will determine whether or not myself and my LGBTQ+ siblings have a future in the United Methodist denomination. So a couple of months ago, a colleague of mine had reached out and asked me what ILIF, my seminary school, could do to support me during this time. As I thought about it and considered what I would need from my seminary or even home churches and other Methodist congregations, I told her that there was nothing that I could think of. The way I had viewed it, the United Methodist Church was either going to vote to be inclusive and affirming of its LGBTQ+ members and leaders, or it was not going to, and we would be out. And if they voted to keep us out, I'd leave. I'd have to. Currently, if the Book of Discipline stands the way it is, I have no future career as a clergy or any spiritual leader in the United Methodist denomination, and I'm not the only one. At this point, prior to my position as Director of Child and Youth Ministries at First United Methodist Church in Missoula, I had been attending a local United Church of Christ church. You see, the UCC is already blatantly affirming of LGBTQ+ individuals, and I've been considering them as my backup plan. Originally, this didn't seem like a big deal until one Sunday in the middle of Advent season, I was sitting in the pews of the UCC, and I was singing their hymnals, and I was reciting their liturgy, and a wave of sadness overcame me. I loved the UCC. I loved everything that they stood for. I loved the community they had built, and I loved the sense of welcoming that I had experienced stepping in those doors. But something seemed to be missing. Something like my heart was strangely warmed kind of feeling. In that moment during service at the UCC, it hit me. I belonged in the United Methodist Church. This church, this denomination, is my home. It is where I have found roots in my faith and my spirituality. And suddenly, in that moment, the special session of the General Conference suddenly mattered so much more, as the decision being made will determine whether or not I actually belong in the United Methodist Church. Now, in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 6, verse 27, Jesus calls us to love our enemies and to do good to those who hate us. When I think of this in the context of the General Conference, I can't help but think about those who are against me and my LGBTQ+ siblings and who view us as a threat to the sanctity of the United Methodist Church. I have to consider what this means. When we, other people, when we build walls and draw lines to push each other out, we are telling a beloved child of God, someone with sacred worth, that they aren't worthy, that they aren't loved, and that they don't belong. And that has serious consequences. And I have to wonder, then, how Christ asks all of us to extend love to those who try to other us, those who try to push us out, those who deem us not worthy. When I see my enemies, those who hate me, those who have anger toward me, those who push me and my siblings out, I don't see their hate and their anger and their resentment, but I see their pain and I see their suffering. And I also see the suffering of their enemies and other LGBTQ+ folk, and how the decisions being made this weekend have the potential to continue to keep us out. And I have the capacity to love my enemies. They are welcome in my church. They are welcome in my ministry. But am I welcome in theirs? Nadia Bolz-Weber, a popular Lutheran pastor, has taught me through her work in theology to look for suffering at the cross, to look for suffering through Christ. Now, for a moment, I want you to try to imagine what it must have been like to be Christ. From the very beginning of his life, he was handed this great responsibility. He was asked to spread God's love and God's truth and grace and wisdom. Jesus cared for the sick, he cared for the poor, and he healed the sick, and he suffered alongside of us so that we may know that God sees us, that God hears us, and that God understands our suffering and recognizes our worth. Now, I want you to imagine for a minute what it must have been like to be Jesus, and then to have decided to avoid this truth. What his life may have looked like, or who he would have been if he would have ignored his calling, if he would have denied to everyone that he were the Son of God, if he would have walked away from the sick, turned an eye to the poor. Now, I want you to think of a time when you felt as though you were holding back or holding something in. Maybe this was quitting a job, or ending a relationship, or pursuing a calling, or even coming clean about your true feelings towards someone. Did you give in? Did you breathe a sigh of relief when you accepted this part of you, this piece of your identity? Did you feel a release, an end to a sort of suffering? I firmly believe that Christ could have abandoned his identity entirely. He could have ran from his call. He was human. But instead, he chose to sit with us. When it came to Jesus' crucifixion, he knew he was going to experience a great deal of suffering in his death. He knew that one of his disciples was going to betray him. He had an option. He could have turned, he could have continued to outrun the Romans and the king, but instead, he stood by as his disciples betrayed him, as he was arrested, and as he carried his cross to his own death, to his own end, and to his own suffering. By choosing to stand in his suffering and stand in his identity and recognize his authenticity and his true self, he put an end to what would have been a greater loss, the truth of himself. As an LGBTQ+ person, or a self-avowed practicing homosexual, the world is designed for our suffering. We face the risk and effects of discrimination on a daily basis. So if you were to ask me why I would choose to live this life as a self-avowed practicing homosexual and experience all of this suffering, I would have to ask you, why would Christ choose to live as the Son of God? Why would he choose to sit among his disciples at the Last Supper? Why would he choose to accept his fate at the cross instead of running away? Did Christ not choose suffering because there was greater joy in living out in his identity, in healing the sick, in helping the poor, and walking alongside of us? We haven't chosen suffering. Instead, like Christ, we've chosen to embrace the experience of our authentic and true selves as God has made us to be, as God has made you to be. The decisions being made at General Conference will not change anyone's identities, nor will they necessarily change anyone's minds. And they're not going to put an end to suffering either. The decisions being made will either take us a step forward or put us steps back. And I'm fearful of the fate of the United Methodist Church. But as someone who has experienced a call from God to be in this ministry, a United Methodist ministry, it pains me to think that I may have to abandon my Methodist roots, not out of choice, but out of force. And I know that if the roles were swapped, and if I had to be making these decisions today and asking how can I welcome my enemies in, they're welcome here. They're welcome in my church. They are welcome in my ministry. And so as we move forward, I ask you all to pray. To pray for the United Methodist Church, to live up to our mantra, open hearts, open minds, and open doors. And I ask that we live up to that by not saying that we have open hearts, open minds, and open doors, but by opening our minds, by opening our hearts, and opening our doors. I encourage you to pray for all of us and ask how, as disciples of Christ, we can continue to let others in, and we can continue to welcome people into our ministry because they belong here, because you belong here. We all belong here. I encourage us all to find more chairs and longer tables rather than meeting each other with an "I'm sorry, but there simply just isn't enough room for you here." I ask you to pray for your enemies and my own, and that we all may find room in our hearts for each other. And I ask you not to pray for the peace of our LGBTQ plus siblings, but instead, I ask you to reach out and ask what it is you can do to provide support for them through this difficult time. I ask you to reach out and what it is that you can do to provide support for each other through this difficult time. I pray for patience and I pray for understandings on all sides of the table. And I pray that we can continue to find unity in one another. And finally, I pray that we can all open our hearts and listen for God, and to hear where God is working in all of this, where God is working always. I ask you to reflect on the scripture of John chapter 14, verses 2 through 3. There is more than enough room in my Creator's home. If this were not so, would I have told you that I am going to prepare a place for you? When everything is ready, I will come and get you, so that you will be with me where I am. God has created a place for all of us. God is calling all of us. My calling was chosen by God. The calling of my LGBTQ plus siblings was chosen by God. And the calling of Christ was chosen by God. God is calling all of us. And are you listening? How will you choose to respond? Thank you. And if you'll join us in our song of response in Faith We Sing, number 2223, They'll Know We Are Christians by Our Love.